Hi, this is Miss Arlequin, and today we're going to be learning about the different types of irony and how we can identify them in text.
The use of words expressing something other than their literal intention. Now that is irony.
As you can see from that previous clip from Futurama, irony is when the opposite of what is expected happens, or when the opposite of what is considered appropriate happens. So basically with irony, you're expecting one thing, but the reality ends up being the opposite.
That's the last of them! Good riddance. What the hell would we ever need guns for?
Victory is ours!
Quick, grab the guns! They're our only hope! Ah! Hey, Bob, you remember the other day you were asking me what the definition of irony was, and I said, ah!
So what was ironic in that Family Guy clip? Well, you saw the townspeople throwing away their guns, and as they threw them away, the last thing they expected was to immediately have these Stewie octopus monsters come and attack them. So the moment they throw away their guns is the moment that they actually need them in order to defeat the Stewie monster. The opposite of what you expect to happen happens. That is the essence of irony. Let's say a fire station burns down. So that's ironic because when you think about a fire station, you would expect that to be the safest place from fires. The whole point of a fire station is for the people inside to be the ones who defeat fires. And the fact that the fire station burned down is the opposite of what you expect, and that's an example of irony. If a bank robber got robbed, that would also be ironic because you expect bank robbers to rob other people, not for themselves to end up being robbed. Opposite of what we expect, ironic. If a person in the desert gets a cold from cool, rainy weather, that would be another example of irony because normally deserts are expected to be dry and hot, and the fact that the desert ended up being cool and wet would be the opposite of what we expected. That would be ironic. A female fox raises a baby rabbit as its own pup. That would also be an example of irony because typically a fox would be eating a rabbit. They're predators and a rabbit is part of the food chain that foxes would consume. But for a fox to actually care for the baby rabbit would be the opposite of what we expect. Now, you want to keep in mind that irony is not a coincidence. For example, if you go to the store and your brother just happens to be there, that's just a coincidence. It's not completely unexpected for your brother to be there. It's not the opposite of what you would expect. Of course, you could sometimes run into your family in a random location. That's just a coincidence when that happens. So think about what other examples of irony you can come up with, and in your notes, jot a couple of examples down. Please make sure that you have at least 2 examples of irony. Now, when we talk about irony, we can actually break it down further. There are 3 specific types of irony. First one we're going to talk about is verbal irony. And verbal irony is an attitude or expression that's the opposite of what is said. So in other words, something is an example of verbal irony when the person is saying one thing, but in their head they mean something else, they're thinking something else. So when you get into a car wreck and the passenger says, "You're a great driver," they don't really mean that you're a great driver. In their head they're thinking, "Ugh, you're the worst, look at what you did to my car." A lot of times people think of sarcasm when they think of verbal irony, and it's true, sarcasm is an example of verbal irony, but something doesn't have to just be sarcastic for it to be verbal irony. Anytime you are thinking one thing and saying something else would be considered an example of verbal irony. If, for example, you have a character in a story who is saying to their friend, "I'm very worried about your health," but they're actually secretly planning to kill them, and so inside they're thinking, "No, I'm not worried about your health, I wish you were dead," that would be considered an example of verbal irony. A second example of irony is situational irony. And situational irony is the closest to the general definition of irony. It's when the situation or the event ends up being the opposite of what's expected. So a lot of those examples we looked at the beginning of the video are situational irony examples, like the fire station burning down or the robber getting robbed. Those are situations where you thought one thing was going to happen and something else did. So another example would be a lifeguard is saved from drowning. That would be an ironic situation because the lifeguards are supposed to be the ones who do the saving, not the ones who are getting saved. And the third and final type of irony is dramatic irony. And that's the type when you as the audience or the reader know something that the character or characters don't. So this is a really common type of irony in horror films. They use a lot of dramatic irony to help build suspense. A lot of times in a horror movie, you're sitting in the audience and you know where the bad guy is hiding, and the frantic girl is walking around her house, kind of like, la la la, I'm so safe. She has no idea there's a killer in her closet. In a situation like that, it can actually end up being humorous because that girl might say something like, wow, I'm so safe here. But it's actually the opposite. She's the farthest from safe. She's about to be killed. It can have you start to get excited, to feel anxious, to feel scared for her, and sometimes even to laugh at her. Now, figuring out what type of irony is being used can be difficult. When you're looking at something that you believe is ironic, you really want to try to eliminate one of the types of irony or two of the types of irony to figure it out. So the first thing I would do is I would look at the example and I would ask myself, is it dialogue? Is somebody speaking? If somebody's speaking, then it may be verbal irony. But if it's not a dialogue, nobody's actually speaking out loud, then it can't possibly be verbal irony, and so then you can eliminate it. Once you've eliminated verbal irony, you can look to consider, is it dramatic irony? So you ask yourself, do I, the reader or the audience, know something that the character doesn't? And then because I know this thing, are they saying something or behaving foolishly because they're unaware of what I know? Again, I'm going to bring you back to that horror movie example. Is the character in her house saying, oh, I'm so safe, but we know she's not actually safe? She's almost a little stupid. But she's not stupid. She just doesn't know what we know. If that's the case, then it's dramatic. If not, well, then it's got to be situational because you've eliminated the first two. And so you want to just double check to make sure. Consider the situation. What's happening in the situation? What do you normally expect in a situation like this? What is happening that we would not expect? Or what's happening that seems inappropriate in this kind of situation? And then in particular, is the ending introducing a twist or surprise of any kind? Because that could also be a sign that there's irony going on. Okay, now that we've learned about the three different types of irony, let's practice what we've learned. Log into your Edmodo account and you will find an irony practice quiz, which will have some examples of different ironic situations. And your job is going to be to identify whether the example is verbal, situational, or dramatic irony. Good luck!